Steve's nephew, like Dave said. And I'd like to think I'm Steve's favorite nephew, but I don't know if that's true. He told me that, but I think he told every single one of us at some point. So, but he asked that I would share a few things from his life. He wanted stories, he wanted jokes, he wanted confessions, he wanted everything. So here I am, and I'll also be reading some thoughts from a few other people, a few family members. But it is a privilege to be here. It's a privilege to share some of Steve's thoughts and about his life, and to thank God for what he did in Steve's heart. And I hope that comes out. And so as many of you know, Steve was a joker. He was unbelievably mischievous. My guess is that each and every one of you, to an extent, had some sort of inside joke with Steve. And if you didn't, you yourself were actually the joke, or part of one of his stories. And so here's a few favorites for you from a lot of people in these first few rows. And so I wish we could tell every story about Steve. Stories about him, but stories that he would like to tell, but that would take 12 days. And so first and foremost, Steve asked me to say absolutely nothing good about KU. Fortunately, he has no KU friends, so that shouldn't be an issue, except for you, Claudia. But bear with me, these were your husband's requests. He hated KU. He actually hated KU more than he loved K-State. He disliked them so much that we drove Steve's ashes to Lawrence last night and spread them on the court at Allen Fieldhouse. That's no joke. No, that's a joke. Steve, but he would have loved that. He would have loved that. Steve was once quoted by the Kansas City Star saying, "If KU was playing the Russians, I'd root for the Russians." He was also quoted saying, "I root for two teams, K-State and anyone who plays KU." Steve had an alias. Steve had an alias who's by the name of Max. And Max Arrogant. And if you know anything about K-State football, which many of you probably do, nobody knows anything about the name Max Arrogant. But Steve actually became Max Arrogant at one point. One night, before a K-State football game, Danny Sparks, one of my dad's good friends and Steve's good friends, played football at K-State many years ago. And so they went up to a players' banquet, alumni banquet. And Danny's wife didn't want to go. She couldn't go, and she's an OU fan, unfortunately. But Danny's wife couldn't go, and so Steve went with him as his +1. Well, little did they know, his name wasn't on the list. And so Danny walks to the door, but the lady stops Steve and says, "What's your name, sir?" And he looks at the table with all the names on it and all the name tags, and he goes, "Right there, I'm Max Arrogant." And he grabbed the name tag, slapped it on his chest, and Steve became Max Arrogant for the evening. And Steve walked around and talked to football players like he was actually Max Arrogant. And Steve was actually very, very grateful that Max Arrogant never showed up that night. In his younger days, he and a friend thought it would be a great idea to drain the Ellenwood Water Tower. So that's exactly what they did. They drained it by opening up all the fire hydrants on Main Street. And I'm sure I'm missing a lot of really good details with this.
Yes, you are.
I know there's a lot of really good ones. But the next day, my grandma Bessie and my mom Jane were driving into town, and the chief of police stopped them at the stoplight and explained the situation. No one was really surprised. And I'm pretty sure Steve got away with one that day. And I think he just got a slap on the wrist for that. But somebody correct me if I'm wrong. In October 2005, my dad Greg, my brother Sam, Steve, and I went to an OU K-State game in Norman. And if you've been to Norman, it's an interesting place. My dad and Steve, the only K-State fans in that season ticket holder section, were sitting in a sea of crimson and cream, which is an experience in itself, with a bunch of Okies. Our punter decided not to show up on the field for a 4th down, and our long snapper hiked the ball to the back of the end zone. We had 10 men on the field, and the punter wasn't there. What happened after that was every single Okie, all 5,000 of them in that section, turned and pointed at the two losers in purple and laughed, and they screamed "Boomer Sooner." So with peg legs and 7 teeth, they all turned and pointed and laughed at Steve and my dad. Steve reacted in a way that only Steve would. he picked out a little kid right behind him who was smarting off and screamed at him, "Shut up, kid." The kid's dad told Steve to shut up. Then my dad gave Steve a punch to the kidneys in the gut and said, "Steve, you're going to get us killed." So we were losing so bad at that point, they decided to head for the exits because Steve's mouth was running. They headed for the exits, and as they were walking down, the kid started laughing and taunting him again. He said, "Shut up, kid, I'm an old man." The guy got extremely mad, started chasing my dad and Steve, and they hightailed it out of there as fast as Steve could. Another story of our families, my family and Steve and Claudia, we went to the Lake of the Ozarks one time, and the whole way down, Steve sang a song. It's called the Auctioneer Song, if you've ever heard it, and it's the most unbelievably obnoxious song ever, and it fits Steve perfectly. But he sang it the whole way down, and he'd see speed limits, and it'd be 65, and he'd say, "And that's a 5, and a 5, and a 4, and a 4. He did it continually, and he still did it till the day he died. Every time he called him, something came up about the Auctioneer Song. On that trip, my brother-in-law Kyle, I believe, was driving the boat. Steve decided, well, I'm going to die in the next 10, 15 years anyways. I might as well get in the tube. So we let Steve get in the tube. Steve got in the tube. We threw him around a few times. And unfortunately, Steve's butt sank so far in the tube, we couldn't get him out of the tube. So we actually had to take the tube off of Steve. We didn't take Steve out of the tube. That was a really good one. Steve's brother, Jeff, remembers a great story. Steve loved coaching sports, Jeff says. He should have made it a career. As an example, he knew how hard it was to teach a kid to box out for a basketball rebound. So he'd get upset when a younger player did exactly what they were taught, but he'd called for a foul anyways. So, at Lyons, Kansas in 1997, Jeff's daughter got called for a pushing foul while boxing out her opponent. None of our fans liked the call. As the 7th grade girls got lined up for the ensuing free throw, there was a short-lived silence. Not for long, though. Steve yelled out, "You're missing one heck of a game, ref." The ref kicked our entire family, including Bessie, Kenneth, Jane and Craig, Jeff and Sherry, out of the gym. As we walked out, Steve turned around and said, "You might as well come with me. You aren't doing anything." Steve was beloved by Katie's classmates after that. So Steve was the pranker, as many of you know. He loved a really good time. But this one story right there, I want to add to it. This was one time that people can actually say, "We got Steve. Steve got." The next day, after that incident, my dad, Greg, called Steve impersonating Jim Orth, who happened to be the athletic director at Elmwood High at the time. Jim was demanding an apology to the school board, the administration, and the entire city of Elmwood, because he had embarrassed everyone. Steve was completely silent on the other end of the phone, and he very softly responded, "Yes, sir, I'll get that done." 5 years went by, and we're sitting at Grandma's table one day for something, and Steve was let off the hook finally. And he looks at my dad and he goes, "That was you?" Steve got finally. Just 3 weeks ago, actually, Claudia told me this last night, right before he passed away. Steve was thinking about a lot of things, obviously. And he called Pitt State University, where he went for a few years, to confess and apologize for shooting off bottle rockets into an open window at a dorm in 1973. He was thinking about every single thing. There's plenty of stories about Steve. Those are a few that I wanted to share, and a few that a few of our family wanted to share. My mom, Jane, says about Steve, "Steve was a wonderful brother to me. We were 5 years apart and really good friends. There wasn't anybody that could make me laugh like he did. He was witty, he was smart, and never missed an opportunity to trip me up with a great joke. I always bit them hook, line, and sinker. When he was a little boy, he actually told my mother that he wanted to be just like Red Skelton. How I wish that she would have encouraged him to go for it, because he missed his calling. Steve sometimes frustrated and humiliated those of us that loved him as well, but we loved him anyways. I would like to make the excuse for him that he wasn't well, and that's why he did some of the things he did, but that would not be completely true. And Steve said no lying and no crying at his funeral. He loved my children like they were his own, and they loved him just the same. Steve FaceTimed me for every day, sometimes two to three times a day usually, to talk about spiritual questions and things that he and Claudia had read that morning in the Bible, or to talk about football, baseball, kids, grandkids, or just about nothing. I know he tried to call many of you and often, and I know many of you hung up often. I also know that not everyone can answer every phone call, and that's okay. I think he forgot towards the last several months of his life that people had jobs and couldn't always drop what they were doing to visit. I knew that, and since I was babysitting my granddaughter, was always able to visit, I picked up every time. He called every day at noon, right in the middle of feeding Hadley, and I would prop the phone up on the table, and he would act like a ferocious baby food-eating bear right there in front of her. He could always fake that little 1-year-old out and make her believe that he was starving her food, that she better be eating before he ate it all gone. It was classic and so Steve. I sure wish I had made a video for future reference. Last spring, we read the book Heaven together by Randy Alcorn. Steve wanted to give those books away at this service, but because of time restraints, we didn't get around to having them at this service. We love the book along with getting into the Word and reading this book. We experienced great comfort as I'm quite sure he knew his end was drawing near. One of my greatest joys as of late was to review every chapter with him and highlight the favorite parts of which there were numerous ones. Steve did not do everything right, but he did get the main thing right eventually. Steve knew he needed a Savior. He did not follow Christ closely until these last several years of his earthly existence. Not everyone will have the opportunities that Steve had to tell people about Jesus the way he did before he passed. He had a fervor and an urgency to tell everyone that he knew he was heading for heaven and that everyone needs to know Jesus Christ personally and turn away from their sin without reservation. Steve asked me to make sure that at his funeral there was a little about him spoken and a whole lot about Jesus. Most of all, I want to stress Steve's last days on earth. He was able to spend the last week and a half with the people he loved most in his life. Emily and Jason, Mackenzie and Todd, and Graham and Ari were able to travel to California to see Steve spend quality time with him. He was so happy to get to see them and visit. Lastly, I cannot adequately convey how his wife Claudia so gingerly cared for my sweet brother. For the majority of their married lives together, Claudia took care of Steve. He was very much able-bodied up until the last year or so. She did not complain, she did not whine, she did it without any help. Talk about one tough, tender gal all in one package. That was Claudia. I was there in the end to help her with him, but she was the one that gave him precisely what he needed as he passed. I gleaned so much from watching this compassionate, loving lady administer sweet care, and I will forever be grateful to her and will never forget her selflessness, kindness, and love. Claudia, you, my sister, fulfilled your vow to God first and then your husband. You told me more than once that you knew what you were getting into when you married Steve. It was not anything you took lightly. It was a beautiful thing to watch. I love you and our family loves you. We could never repay you, nor would you ever think of wanting to be repaid. This is just who you are. You just did what you did and loved Steve and wanted him to be comfortable. Thank you, and may God richly bless you because of your commitment, courage, and love. Lastly, I know there are a few things Steve would most certainly want everyone to hear if he was able to speak to us in his heavenly actuality. I can about here and say these words. He would say, Jane, tell everyone these things. He'd say, I wish that I had done better with what God had gave me on earth. I wish I had tried harder to be a better husband and a father. I wish I had loved each other deeper and stayed closer to others, to our family, that is this wonderful gift. I would say, forgive each other and do it often. And I would say to everyone, hey everyone, this is a real place. You don't want to miss it. My faith is now sight. I'm so thankful I was Steve's little sister. He was a fun brother and he loved me unconditionally and never held anything against me. I had to tell him some hard things he didn't always want to hear, and I had opportunities to share the most beautiful conversations and words that he savored every word of. It was an honor and a privilege to sit by his side, holding him and praying for him as he entered heaven. I deeply appreciate and will cherish that moment for the rest of my earthly life. Dave's going to talk about the book Heaven in a few minutes, but this was Steve's favorite paragraph in the whole book Heaven. Why would you not come? What reason could be good enough to turn away from Jesus and from the eternal life that he offers in the new heaven and the new earth? In the words of C.S. Lewis, all your life, an unattainable ecstasy,